enforcement subsystems. We're going to talk about the history of law enforcement, where it's going. I love this week's class because it's about the history and it's about where policing is going and understanding the entire, it's hard to understand all of it, but to understanding some of the issues with today's policing. And to look at that, we need to look at the history and where it came from and where it went. Before there was a formal police system that was put in place, the colonies were protected by the Night Watch, and that dates back to the 1630s. And what was the Night Watch? Well, the Night Watch was a bunch of men who volunteered to work the night. If you were wealthy, you would not volunteer. You would pay somebody to do your watch. And that really brought about the paid police officers position. So those were the first hired protections. But the most of the hired protection were criminals. So they, going back, I mean, they were hiring people that were criminals to watch people who, and a lot of them, the vast majority of them would either sleep or they would drink while they were on duty. The first night watch was founded in Boston in 1630, and then followed suit was New York. It followed in 1650. Both of these police departments are the beginning of law enforcement in the United States, true law enforcement in the United States. So the policing history in the South was much different, and it was for a different purpose. You don't hear about this. I never heard about this growing up as a kid in school in my history lessons. I never heard about Tulsa either, and I should have heard about that. And if you don't know about Tulsa, you should be looking it up. But the history of police in the South differed, and we're on Black History Month, so I'm going to make sure that you understand that you should be looking up Tulsa. But the patrollers, the first form of policing in the South, were known as the Slave Patrol, which began in the colonies of Carolina in 1704. And the patrol was made up of 3 to 6 men riding on horseback and carrying whips, ropes, and even guns. And they were a group they were hired. They were not hired. They were forced because they were slaves. They would include chasing and hunting escaped slaves, releasing terror on slave communities to prevent riots and to keep plantation owners in check. They lasted until the Civil War and eventually gave way to the Ku Klux Klan, which to this day we are stuck with. And I don't know why we are stuck with it. They should have been long gone. But so it gave way to that. Interestingly enough, the first Black police officer, I believe, was hung by a member of the Ku Klux Klan. In the North, as more immigrants moved into cities in the mid-1800s, citizens looked for a more formal way to keep order. So what happened was you saw that the cities saw mobs and public lewdness, disorderly conduct, and prostitution. So they were hired a lot for that purpose. And the first police department was in 1838, was Boston. Shortly thereafter came New York. New York was in 1945. They had their own force. Then followed Chicago, New Orleans, and Cincinnati. By the 1880s, most every major city had a police department. They had detectives came shortly thereafter. Almost all the police forces were structured similarly, and their main duty was to prevent crime and keep order. In 1800s, there were reports of corruption among some police forces. Why? Well, because money. All right, so you have corrupt politicians, you have corrupt police officers, they work hand in hand. This actually kind of worked right into Boston up until you had the Whitey Bulger and you had the Conley case, the FBI Conley person. So corruption is not new to police work. It's, hopefully it's much less now. The start of the first private police force was the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and you could hire them, and they're around to this day. They're still around, so that's an important thing to know. The private security started by Pinkerton. Police departments changed, and in the 1900s, federal and state police forces were born. Now, when we look at those are the 3 major levels of and agencies of law enforcement. Those 3 are the federal, state, and local. All have a very important purpose. And I want to go a little bit over that because I think we need to understand how they're different. And one of the things that they differ on is I'm going to go to each one. They differ. They all came into working together pretty much in 2001, but they all have jurisdictions that others don't have. So as police work expanded, you saw that, so I'll give you an example. If I, as a local police officer, have a crime that happens in my community and it ends up in another community and I don't have jurisdiction, I have to have another police officer, if it's a felony, make that arrest on my behalf. But if you are state police, you have jurisdiction through the whole state of Massachusetts. But what happens if it goes into Connecticut? Or what happens if it goes into another state wherever you live? Who has jurisdiction? Who can make the arrest? Who can make the stoppage? What happens? Each crime you are charged with has to happen in the jurisdiction to where it happened. So this happens to be problematic when you have like sexual assaults that maybe they were picked up in a mall or they were picked up in a movie and they went on a date with this person and that person crossed state lines or crossed city lines or crossed county lines. County lines are important because each county has their own court. And then you have to think who can do jurisdiction and where is the court case going to take place. Each crime in Massachusetts, and I'm sure every other state as well, has jurisdictional guidelines to go by. Some crimes, it can be where it started and where it ended, like a sexual assault. If it happened in one town and ended in another, you have jurisdiction in either one. But if you have certain other crimes, jurisdiction is a big issue, and that person can be found not responsible, or the case can be thrown out. So as I say, getting back to history, we have the three agencies, and the three agencies now work together a lot more, and that started after 911. It evolved heavily where people started talking to each other. Police work came light years ahead when they all started talking to each other and stopped worrying about who had jurisdiction, who was going to be the top dog. And that has been always a problem in law enforcement. Who is going to take over a case? And who's going to come in there and be the bully instead of working together? We all have something. I always like to think of law enforcement as a puzzle. You start with usually the outside of a puzzle, and then everybody gives you pieces to that puzzle. But if someone chooses to keep that puzzle piece out, then you don't have a complete picture of what the crime is, and you don't have a complete answer on how to solve that issue. So you need to look at that puzzle and say, what does everybody have to offer? And that happened after 2001 because there was no sharing of evidence. And now you see evidence being shared more freely and more accessible. And that's good. It's not accessible to me, the common layman now, but it is accessible to each police department. So that's what happened with the new era. But with the new era came a lot of different departments. So we have local, we have county law enforcement. In Massachusetts, our sheriffs are in charge of corrections. In the South, they're in charge of law enforcement. Every state is different, and it's important to know what state you're on, who is in charge. All of our campuses in Massachusetts that are state colleges have their own police departments. In fact, if you look at UMass has a higher population than most cities in Massachusetts. So that's important to look at as well. All right. I think that they give you a lot of information to go off on here, and I think that's important for you. I want to talk about Robert Peel. The Peel Principle. The Peel Principle goes way back to English law. And this is the Peel Principle was brought over to the United States. If you look at the Peel Principle that came from the late 1800s, or might have been like 1829 thereabout. When you look at the Peel Principle, it's still the same to this day, or it should be. It's a basis of good community police work. Police exist to prevent crime and order. But the first line, the police are the public and the public are the police. If you don't have both, you don't have order, and it doesn't work. It needs both to work. People in the public need to have their voices heard. They need to be able to put some input in. They're there to prevent crime and disorder. Their job is their public approval is important. As you can see, last week they're trying to outlaw in certain states no-knock warrants. The public is given their voice. They don't want chokeholds. By the way, Massachusetts chokeholds were never allowed. In fact, we were taught in almost every academy, 8 pounds of pressure, 8 pounds of pressure, 8 seconds, a person will die, stay away from the neck. Never, ever hold on to anybody by the neck. That was day one. So when I saw that happen, I was like, all the police I worked with, like, oh my God, that is like rule number one, never choke. Police must secure the willing cooperation of the public. That means we need to work together. We need to work as a team. The degree of cooperation can be secured diminishes proportionally to the necessity of the use of physical force. The more physical force, the less the community is happy with you, as you can see that. So a police officer needs to be impartial. They can't put their own views in there. Black Lives Matters clearly says you need to be impartial. You need to be there for everybody. You cannot be biased. And bias is taught a lot in the academy, as is, verbal techniques for working with people. But reality, it needs to work on even more. Police use physical force to the extent necessary to secure observance of the law or to restore order only, and only is underlined, when persuasion, hello, let's knock this off type stuff, advice, and warning is found to be insufficient. You should never go to the last step first. The first step should be, what can we do to solve this issue? All right, so as you can see, I love the Peel principle, and it's something, if you haven't heard it before, you might want to look up. The next thing we're going to go to is on our paper is we're going to be looking at, you're going to choose one of the following critical issues faced by law enforcement. I want to show you a little technique that I use. First of all, technology in law enforcement. I highlight it. I go to Google search. I had a student tell me last month she didn't know anything about this. And I'll add enforcement. So when you look at technology in law enforcement, you say, okay, what police officers who go to 6 months of training need to know all about voice technology. They need to know all about robots, video doorbells, shot spotters, thermal imaging, artificial intelligence, smarter cruisers, automatic license plate recognitions. They need to know about enhanced body-worn cameras. And let's talk about those cameras. I'm going to go right to those cameras in a second. But see, my point to you on this is you can go to any one of these, look at these and say, wow, these are all new. Cybercrime. All right, you have police officers. This is a master's course on cybercrime, yet they're supposed to know about it in a 6-month class. Gang violence, highly trained in that area. I want to talk about cameras. People love cameras. I want to show you, I gotta find this picture. Well, I want you to think of your camera. Hold on 1 second. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to show you this picture. Here's 3 very important pictures to me. We're going to start with this. This is my academy, when I was in the academy. There's my face. And then we have the next picture. Is the last picture I have of my father and I, me as a young police officer. And then I have this picture. This is me, my granddaughter. Yes, she is wearing Rosie the Riveter pajamas. You can tell who her grandmother is. And I say to you, look at your own cameras. Look at your own pictures. How many of you, I have right now probably 5,000 pictures stored in my, in the service, the data provider that I pay for. Of those pictures, the one that's most important to me is this one. Why? Because I have one. This one, I got about 10,000 of this baby. The reality of it is cameras are great, but how do we pay for them? Because data is expensive. Data storage is very expensive. So it's great to say put cameras on everybody, but how do you know which picture to save? Who's in charge of saying which picture to save? Because reality is we don't have enough data storage. There's not enough data storage out there. So if I got rid of this one, I would cry all day long. If I got rid of this one, I got 1,000 that will take up just very similar. This one, I can go to friends. I can go to everyone in that academy. They have that picture. My point to you is data storage is one of the downsides of wearing body cameras, because police departments are finding they can't afford to pay for that. So keep in mind the pros and the cons. I love cameras. I just wish there was a way that data storage could be done at an economical way. I mean, the cameras are cheap. The cameras are very cheap. The storage is not. Just one of the cons. So think of the pros and cons.